Wildfires in Canada choking New York with smoke. Europe's hottest summers on record pushing hospitals to the brink. Entire Pacific islands sounding alarms as seas rise faster than expected. The climate crisis is here, and the world keeps asking, can international law really stop climate change? To understand that, we have to trace what international law has already tried, what it has achieved, and why the results are still mixed. The story begins in 1992, at the Rio Earth Summit, when countries adopted the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was a landmark agreement, but it had no binding emission cuts, only the framework for future action. The first big test came with the Kyoto Protocol, adopted in 1997 and entering into force in 2005. For the first time, developed nations were legally bound to cut emissions. But the US signed and never ratified. Canada withdrew in 2011, and major emitters like China and India had no binding obligations. By 2012, global greenhouse gas emissions had climbed nearly 50% compared to 1990. Kyoto showed that binding law without universal buy-in was a paper shield. That led to the Paris Agreement in 2015. Nearly every country in the world signed on, 196 parties in total. Instead of binding cuts, Paris introduced nationally determined contributions, voluntary pledges updated every 5 years. The advantage was inclusivity, but the weakness was clear: no penalties for failure. When the United States withdrew under President Trump in November 2020, there was no legal way to stop it. When President Biden rejoined in February 2021, the treaty welcomed America back without consequence, and in January 2025, Washington announced another withdrawal, once again showing how fragile commitments remain under international law. But treaties are only part of the picture. Courts have become unexpected enforcers. In 2019, the Dutch Supreme Court ruled in the Urgenda case that the government must cut emissions at least 25% below 1990 levels by 2020, grounding its decision in human rights law. In 2021, Germany's constitutional court struck down weak climate targets, ruling that they violated the rights of future generations. And in April 2024, the European Court of Human Rights sided with a group of Swiss senior women, declaring that insufficient climate action breached their right to private life under the European Convention. These rulings show how human rights law is being used to force stronger climate policies, sometimes more effectively than global treaties. Trade law is also entering the fight. On October 1, 2023, the European Union launched its Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. This mechanism requires importers of carbon-intensive goods like steel, cement, and aluminum to pay extra unless their producers meet EU carbon standards. It's essentially a climate tariff, exporting European climate law to trading partners worldwide. Some nations call it protectionism, but it may become one of the most powerful legal levers for climate action, because it ties compliance directly to market access. And there's more. International tribunals are being asked to weigh in. In March 2023, the UN General Assembly requested an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on states' legal obligations to prevent climate harm. On July 23, 2025, the ICJ delivered its opinion, affirming that states have binding obligations to prevent and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and to protect the rights of present and future generations. While advisory opinions aren't legally enforceable, this ruling carries immense moral and political weight, and it will likely influence national courts and policymakers for years to come. Still, the data shows how far there is to go. In March 2024, the International Energy Agency reported that global CO2 emissions hit a record 37.4 billion tons in 2023, despite historic growth in renewable energy. And according to the UN's Emissions Gap Report, the world's current pledges put us on course for 2.5 to 2.9 degrees Celsius of warming by 2100, well beyond the Paris goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So what's the verdict? International law has built frameworks, created accountability, and empowered activists and judges to demand stronger action. Treaties like Kyoto and Paris, court cases like Urgenda and Klimasignorinen, trade mechanisms like the EU's carbon border tax, and advisory opinions from the ICJ, they all matter. They shape norms, raise pressure, and slowly change behavior. But can they stop climate change? Not by themselves. Law can guide and pressure, but it can't decarbonize power plants, redesign economies, or force governments to keep promises when politics shifts. At best, international law is a scaffold. It holds up the structure, but the real building has to be done by national policies, industries, and societies willing to act. The bottom line, international law is vital, but it's not a silver bullet. It can show the way, but it cannot force the journey. So what do you think? Should climate law grow teeth, with penalties and enforcement? Or would that collapse fragile global cooperation? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the issues that shape our future.